Hi, my name is Sumukoko. I'm a digital media developer based in Wales. I started filming a few years ago, and from the very beginning of my life, I've always loved live events. Live events have always been the cornerstone of my life, my Christian experience, and everything like that. I've always loved the stage and live event and how to host them. And in most recent years, starting with a few years ago, I've moved more into live production of music. So I just want to go through a few steps with you so that you realize what can I do to, what are the steps which I go through personally when I did my different events to create an atmosphere and to capture the moment well. So, what are the key things you're considering? Remember, at this point in time, I want to make it clear that what I am talking about is the actual production. What happens on stage, I'm assuming that you have rehearsed, you have got things right, you're playing the right note, and you're doing everything else. So, I'm trying to say, how can I capture this well after you have done things right? Remember, trash in, trash out. If you put a bad performance on stage, you will get a bad video. If you put a bad recording in, you will get a bad recording out. So get your stuff right first before we start. Now, the first stage I go through when I start looking at a live event is I look at the venue. Unfortunately, most people, when they get to somebody like me to do their visuals, whether it's photography or videography, by the time they get to me, they have already decided on their venue. It's only in very few bespoke situations that anybody asks me, what should we look for in a venue? So right now, I just want to talk about a few things you're looking for in a venue. One of the key things you're looking for in a venue, I'm looking at my notes here to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. One of the first things you look for in a venue is you're looking for a venue without any windows. Yes, you've heard me. Try to avoid venues without any windows because natural light clashes with the light you're having here. The best way of looking at it is, have you ever tried ironing clothes early in the early hours of the morning? If you take an iron and ironing clothes in the early hours of the morning, you will notice it's hard to see the clothes themselves. That's simply because the natural light, the wavelength of the natural light is cancelling. It's called interference with the wavelength of the light inside. It's the same thing as when you film. More windows doesn't mean more light. More windows means more interference. So try to avoid a venue with a poor, absolutely poor lighting, and also poor, no windows. Sorry about that. Now, the key issue I'll say is, what about lighting? Well, you can always bring more lights, but it's difficult to cover windows. But if you do get a venue with windows, think of time. You could start your event after it goes dark. You could cover up some of your windows, but it would be nice for you to avoid them because, like I said, most of the time, by the time you show up as a videographer and all that, they've already picked on the venue. Second thing is acoustics. Acoustics are a key thing when you pick a venue. I do realize that most of the time you're doing live recording, you're picking your sound off the mixer. But if people are stressing to understand what's going on in the audience, people won't really understand what's going on. So the best thing you need to do is look at a venue where acoustics are handled well. Look at a venue where the PA system is set and handles acoustic well. That way you know that whenever you're doing your recording, you're already starting on a good note. Like I've said before, trash in, trash out. So other things you need to consider when you're picking a venue. So say you've picked your venue. You need to go around your venue and look at a few things if you're going to do live filming. Firstly, where are your stage lights? So you need to look at your lighting. What is available? Because at this point in time, you need to ask yourself, does this venue have sufficient lighting to work, or do we need to bring in more light? Those are decisions you need to make at that point in time. Or maybe should we pick another venue? Because you may pick the venue and think the lighting will work, and then you realize it's not really working. But sometimes if you get a full package with a lighting which works, you don't really need to bring in extra lighting and it saves on costs. So look at all these type of things you're looking at. Another thing we look at is PowerPoints. This is a key issue. I try when I'm filming live events to run as many of the cameras as I can on actually power leads because I know that I don't have to sit down running around with all these batteries, charging them and all that. So I run my cameras as much as possible on battery. So I need to know where I'm going to get my power sources from. So when you walk in, you need to know where all the power points are. One of the best ways of doing it is when we were doing the Todd Delaney shoot in London. One of the best things we did was we had a CAD drawing with all the key considerations. CAD drawings are available for most buildings, but they may not have them. So even a simple sketch will suffice, telling you where all the locations are and how you intend to put the plan up. Depending on how big your production is, say for example, like when Benjamin Dube did his, where he put his piano up on the big stage, you understand, they would have a technical spec of that stage. Start by looking at what they want to build so you know where you will place your equipment. Always know things like that well in advance. So another key consideration you need to consider is your height of your stage. The height of the stage creates stage height is very important, because one thing stage height does is it makes the audience sink and makes the stage more visible. And it creates a better experience for the people watching, because they're not trying to look over somebody's head, because it's high above the head of the person standing next to them. But what it also does for you, it gives you a place to place a camera person right underneath there for him to pick the low close-ups coming in from the well. I remember when we did that Buzz and Melody shoot a few years ago with my friend Brian, who's actually filming me now. We never had a track and dolly, which we would have loved to had, but we had a barrier between where the audience was and the actual stage, and you could stay in the stairwell and film from there. And that really helped the experience. So look at the stage, know its height, so that you can know what your solutions are for in and around the stage. So the next thing I consider after I've looked at the venue is the layout. Now that I know the venue I'm filming in, I need to sit down and think about how do I get the cameras positioned in positions which will work for the show. And one of the key considerations you need to think about is, you know where your power points are, you know where you're going to run your cables, you need to know where you're going to put your cameras. For me, I always start with the first principal camera. So I have my first 3 principal cameras which I start with. For some strange reason, these last few years, I'm putting 2 cameras in the back, one to take the mid shot, the other one to take the wide of the stage. So the mid shot of the artist performing and the wide of the stage, both coming from the same position. It seems to work well for me. This is just my preference. You can do what. So once I set those cameras, the next cameras I have is I set my jib. So once I set those 3 cameras, then every other camera rotates around those points. Then I try to look at, because every shoot is different. So I start working out where the cameras will be based on those 3 cameras. And the next thing I try to do is then set my action cameras. One of the key action cameras I put is on the drums. If you're going to do a live event, you need to capture the drums, and the best way of capturing it is with an action camera. Right now I'm using the Yi action camera. It's a Chinese brand, really, really good. I'm not using the GoPro, but if you prefer the GoPro, go the GoPro way. I don't want to talk about brands so much. I can tell you about the brands I use, but I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about brands, because I know I can say something about a great brand, but tomorrow that brand will move on. So by the time you watch this, I'd rather you spend a lot of time knowing the type of camera you will use for there. So the next camera you need to talk about is your jib. Always put a broadcast camera or a prosumer camera which has got a wide focal length, and do not put a DSLR, a mirrorless camera, or any camera which has shallow depth of field on your jib. That's simply because you want everything to be in focus. So try to put a broadcast camera. Sony has got some good broadcast cameras. I've also used Panasonics on the jibs. I've done both these types of cameras. Always put them on the jibs and make sure that if the camera has autofocus, try to take it off autofocus and try to use a very high f-stop to make sure that everything is in depth, because you want a camera which is moving. And make sure that you get your shutter speed aligned well with your frame rate, so you don't get rolling shutter situations when you're putting on your jib. Those things are considerations you need to think about when you're putting up your jib. The second thing you need to consider is the angle at which you need to put down your jib. Does your jib angle down properly, or is it only an overhead? So those are the things you need to consider when you're doing this: is where is your jib, how do you intend to move around with it, and how do you intend to do all these type of things. So let me just consult my notes and see where I am. So the last thing is, most recently, especially I discovered this on the third shot, is it's good to have, remember we talked about the stage, right by the stage, a cinematic camera. So even a DSLR would do with the better the lens, the better capturing your close-ups. Remember, and I don't want to stress this any less, is remember that these cameras have a shallow depth of field, and if you have an artist who's moving around a lot, make sure that you have put a person who understands follow focus really well and pull focus. He's able to understand and predict where the person is going to be. And basically, even if when you're doing the edit, try to focus more on the shots where he's not doing a lot of things, he's not moving around a lot to cut to that camera. So think about where you're going to put this type of cameras. Now, on the back, I have tried both. On the back for my wide, I have used both a DSLR and I've also used a broadcast camera. It's all about preference. What do you want to see visible, or what type of look are you looking for? So if you want the more arty look, you go for a DSLR. If you want to see everything on stage happening on your wide, you go for your broadcast. So it's all about what you decide to do. Remember, again, shallow depth of field, if there's a lot of movement back and forth, so that means coming close to the camera and far away, remember you will get that blur. So make sure that you know the best camera to put for everywhere. And remember, high f-stop if you're going to do those type of things, because it's better to shoot a lot of these things in the broadcast camera, using broadcast cameras, because everything will be clean. But the cinematic look just adds an extra layer of beauty when it comes to these types of shots. When you have sorted out where you're going to put everything, you have had a good conversation with a lot of people. By this time, you'd have spoken to your lighting guy, knowing exactly what you have done. You'd have spoken to the artist, knowing exactly what is going to perform. You need to pick your crew. Now, the first thing I would want to say is, the first rule is less is more, or leave it alone. If a camera is going to be still, for example, taking a wide, and it's not going to do anything throughout the show except it needs being switched on and off, do not, and I stress this, do not put anybody on that camera. Leave it the way it is. Switch it on at the beginning of the show and switch it on when you need it and switch it off when you don't need it. Don't put people on cameras which you intend to just run the way they are throughout, simply because you don't want things which are already all right to be messed with. So remember, every time you introduce a human, you're introducing human error. Then secondly, if you're going to have a jib or you're going to have a dolly, remember to, please, if you don't know what these terms are, I would suggest that you notebook, write them down, Google them. So if you're going to have a jib, you're going to have a dolly, make sure, absolutely make sure that you have somebody who has done this before, or they have gone through it enough times to satisfy how you intend to do this. And that's for your shots which are coming in right from the bottom and from the top and swinging by. So those are the type of shots you need to remember. So, and then secondly, the rest of the cameras you can pick here and there. Now, you need to have a person running, either supplying batteries or getting cards and copying them out. Someone who's extremely reliable, copying on a good machine. Nowadays, most people use Macs to copy this type of things because they copy really fast. But they could be, like I said, I don't like talking about brands. I use PCs and Mac. I don't have any problem with whatever computer you have. Just make sure that just make sure that you have somebody running around who's not on any camera doing this type of job. If you can manage to spare the staff, make sure that that person is reliable. When he gets a camera from a person, he does it. All right, so now we have arrived on, I need to turn my page so that you can get where I am. We have arrived on we have arrived on the D-Day. So the key thing about arriving on the D-Day is, depending on whatever happens, is you go in, you set everything to plan. Always arrive at the earliest convenience when as soon as, okay, let me say this again. Arrive at the earliest convenience when the building is open. So as soon as the building is open, you need to be there. Set your cameras, know everything is set beforehand. Mark out places if you need to put your camera safe if you don't trust the place. Always leave people with your cameras to make sure that nobody moves them, so that they are always where you are. At this point in time, when I'm working in different regions, I make sure that the region which I am working in is the region the camera is set into. At this point in time, make sure that you go through all your cameras, and if they're set to the European zone, let it be set to Europe. If it's set to PAL, if it's set to the American thing, make sure that your settings are correct at this point in time. Then when you make sure that your settings are correct at this point in time, you need to have your final conversation with your lighting guy. Find out what he intends to do. Now, if you're going to have a full dress rehearsal, that's fantastic. But if you're not, make sure you're there through sound check. Ensure you tell the lighting guy to say sound check is also light check, so that we can make sure we sort everything out. Then after you do this, during that period of time, frame your cameras. If you can frame your cameras, then you know that you don't have to think so much about them. Know the frames. Already, I've told you about a few frames here and there. The key issue is, don't have cameras with similar frames. You know, if one is on a wide, the other one should be on a mid, another one should be on a close-up. But make sure that you frame your cameras at that point in time, so that you're not worrying about what the frame is when it's action time. Now, once you make sure that everything is ready, spend time in prayer, give a pep talk to encourage your team. Make sure your team has eaten and drank a lot and they rest their legs, you know, a few hours before the show. Because the last hour, you need them to be standing, you need to be strong, and you need them to be of good cheer. All right. So now you have done everything. You have prayed, you have sorted yourself out, you know where you're going with stuff, you know how everything is going, you have had your talk, you know where you are. Second thing you need to understand is, a few things you need to understand is, are you going to have talk back in your filming? Now, talk back is just headphones and mics to talk with everybody. And are you going to be in a director's booth to see all this? I have done it both ways. I've been in a director's booth, and I've also been walking around to making sure everything is okay. It doesn't really matter. Just remember that you're walking around is not for you to be filmed. So you're not supposed to film yourself. Don't create an editing nightmare by walking around. Make sure that you have all your discussions beforehand. Game time is game time. So once you do your game time, everything starts. Game time is game time. The next thing you need to do and tell yourself is this. Make sure that you have checked your cards. Your card sizes will last the duration of the show, or you know when to change them. Make sure you discuss with the artist to take breaks on the maximum length of your shortest camera, so you don't lose any footage. That's the first thing you need to do. Make sure that you have planned your breaks in such a way, because you don't want to miss any camera not filming. Change through your cameras, make sure you copy them, but those are the key issues you need to remember. Batteries, cameras which need to run on batteries, and cards, make sure that they're able to run throughout. If you have cameras which can shoot dual, shoot both of them at the same time. Don't daisy chain the filming, meaning film from one card to the next. No, make sure you're filming at the same time, because I have lost footage before. It's not a nice thing if it's a one-off show. If it's a one-off show, please don't daisy chain. At the end of the filming, this is what I recommend. Don't leave the venue until You have copied the footage onto 2 hard drives. Onto 2 hard drives. Make sure that you've marked all your cameras. Make sure that you've marked your metadata. You know that this was a mid. Who was in control of the camera? I always mark that. And I don't mark them. I will mark it as camera 1 wide. And I might even put the name of the person who was filming, because that's very, very important for me to know the name of the person who was filming at that particular time for any reason. I just want to know as much information about the shot when I'm editing. So there are many different things we can do to make sure, that all these things are done. You understand? So, and secondly, when you're filming throughout, have a notebook to point out certain things which you might pass over to the editor so he knows what is to expect, which happened in the show, and what you intend to do, because the first edit begins at filming. You decide what happens, and you might be the one editing, you might not be. So like there are shows where I've shot and edited, but sometimes I film, but I'm told, oh, we're going to hire somebody else to edit. So I may direct, or I may, so it all depends on different types of things. So guys, it all depends on what you intend to do. Remember, have a blast. Remember, capture the moment. Remember, every scenario changes. Now, the last thing I would want to talk about is this. During the event itself, there may be requirements for you to go live on Facebook. Make sure that you have tested this on Facebook or YouTube or wherever they want you to go live on their website or anything like that. Make sure that you've got a proper video mixer around. Make sure the sound, make sure there's no latency between the spoken voice and the video. Make sure that you have gone through all of this before you go live. And once you have clicked all the checks, and make sure that you have made the decision about doing things the right way before you go live, before you make the decision to go live. Also, make sure that the person who's doing it knows that things have gone wrong. It's time for us to cut signal. So those are the considerations you might have. I might have another session with you on discussing different types of things you need to consider when going live. Nowadays, it's getting easier and easier. I've seen some new equipment from so many different places, from Roland, from Data Vision. There's some nice equipment coming out for doing live visual and live mixing. I might do a session just on that. But remember that it is important that you do things the right way. I want to thank you all for listening. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I will answer them. Or if you are in any of the neighborhoods I'm filming in and you want to come and tag along and see how we do things, please come along. Stay blessed.